And we will have a terrific panel that will walk you through a lot of the deeper issues that all these findings implicate, and there will be an opportunity for you to participate in that discussion as well. Before we do that, and as we're actually getting served with lunch, we're going to go ahead and have a couple of the authors of the report talk to you a little bit more about what are in the findings. So they will, I guess, sort of sing for their supper here. And the two people who we're going to have kind of do a little bit of a tag team show will talk to you about what we found. You'll get to watch a little bit of TV and see some of the campaign ads that are running around the country. We'll see what that does for your appetite. And the two people who we're going to have come up and really sort of lead this presentation are Charlie Hall, who is a director of communications at Justice at Stake. He's listed as editor, but is very much one of the co-authors of this report, and Adam Skaggs, who is a counsel at the Brennan Center. And I mentioned earlier that James Sample is here. He'll be one of your panelists. He was one of the authors. And then Linda Casey, who's also one of the authors with the Institute of Money and State Politics, is also here. And these are organizations with whom we work every day, and this is very much a collaborative effort. And we really appreciate just their continuous involvement. So why don't we go ahead and keep things moving here, and we'll have Charlie and Adam talk to you about what we found.
Thank you very much, Bert, and of course, thank you, Justice O'Connor, for being here today. There were four groups, really, that took part in doing the New Politics report, which for the first time, we've done these since the 2000 election, but historically, they've only covered the preceding 2 years. And we really felt that enough had happened that we could actually take a step back and look at the decade as a whole. And so, before we start, I wanted to thank the other members of the author team who are not here. James Sample, now Hofstra University law professor, and Linda Casey is from a group called the National Institute on Money and State Politics. And Eva, if you could flip the slide here. Really, actually, an addictive organization that once you discover how to use it, can answer virtually any question that Charlie Cobb was raising earlier about where does the money come from and who does it go to. It was absolutely essential to this report. And actually, if you flip one more, basically they will be over the, they help us follow judicial candidates, ballot measures, and really virtually any major state or federal election. So I wanted to extend my thanks to them as we get ready to do this report. Now, really in the 100-odd pages, Adam and I will just go through about 5 or 10 points because it's impossible to go through the entire report in depth. But the real change of the last decade can be reduced to one word, and that is money. This chart here shows the 1990s versus the 2000s. And what we really did was we simply tallied up, Linda tallied up, how much had been contributed to candidates in the 1990s, and it totaled $83.3 million. 2000s decade, $206.9 million. It more than doubled. And then that in itself did not tell the full story. Because one of the major sources of money that has really flooded into judicial elections has been by groups that essentially cut out the middleman and simply fund their own campaigns, put on their own TV ads that have poured tens of millions of dollars additionally into these campaigns. We calculated, using very conservative technology, that at least $39 million more was spent by these outside ads. So really the true total of what was spent in the last decade on judicial elections was closer to $246 million, essentially triple what had been spent in the 1990s. Where did the money come from? Really people with a direct interest in the elections. This is what we call a sector chart, the pie chart behind me. Business groups and businesses accounted for 62 million, lawyers of all sides, 59 million more. Political parties, which oftentimes served as a conduit for either the first two groups, unions, really accounted for just about 75% of that spending. So the idea that this is democracy at work, everybody is trying to write a small check to their favorite judicial candidate, really has not been the case. And in fact, although we don't have a slide for it, I will do a little show and tell here. One of the most interesting things we did was we looked at 29 elections in 10 states, which had the most expensive elections, and we asked the question, how much did the top 5 spenders spend on a judicial election versus everybody else? And the top 5 averages this red bar that runs across the bottom of the page, $473,000 on average per group. Everybody else, 116,000 donors, averaged $850. It was almost like 2 different worlds participating in this race. So we really have seen very fundamental changes in the process. Much of this change has been seen most visibly on the television screen. So with that, I will turn it over to Adam.
Thank you, Charlie. As Charlie said, as the overall amount of money being raised by candidates and spent by candidates in their campaigns has basically skyrocketed over the past 10 years, the amount of money spent on TV advertising has also increased. So over the course of the decade, the conservative methodology that we use, the conservative estimates that we have come to, suggest that about $93 million was spent on TV ads and judicial campaigns. Now, while that has grown slowly and steadily across the course of the decade, by the last full election cycle, and by that I mean the 2007-2008 election cycle, we saw the most expensive campaign in terms of TV advertising that we had seen throughout the entire decade and that we have ever seen. So during that election campaign, we saw more than $25 million, about $26.6 million spent by candidates, political parties, and outside groups on television advertising. Let's get the next slide. As the amount of money has increased that groups are spending on TV ads, so has the number of ads aired. So it's not surprising that if you look at these 2 lines, they point in a steadily northward direction. The top line is even-year elections. The bottom is off-year elections. So because there are, in many states, many more states have elections in even-numbered years, the overall totals are always more than they are for odd number of years. But comparing the 2 different cycles, you see that the numbers are steadily increasing. The number of television ads has increased steadily. I think one thing that's significant when we looked at who was paying for these ads, who was sponsoring all of these television advertisements, is that candidates, while obviously they're running a lot of them, are not running all of them. And the outside groups that Charlie was referring to have spent a tremendous amount of money. So over the course of the decade, about $39 million of the $93 million that was spent on ads was spent by outside groups. That's about 42% of the total for the decade. And if you look at the last full election cycle, it's even more than that, more than half. So that in 2008, non-candidate groups, political parties, and special interest groups spent 52% of all the money on television ads that was spent. What's really significant about the spending by these non-candidate groups is that they've in effect become the attack dogs of judicial elections. 87% of all the negative ads run in 2008 were run not by the candidates themselves, but by these outside groups. So the candidates are able to sort of take the high road, run positive, biographical, inspirational ads, while letting outside groups kind of do the dirty work in these judicial elections. And the amount of money, as I said, that these groups are spending has now become more than half of all the money spent on television ads. With that as a general background, what we'd like to do is sort of take a little bit of a break now, give you some TV to watch while you enjoy your lunch, and we're going to show you some of the advertisements that I think are typical of the kind of campaign ads that we've seen over the past decade. These don't go all the way back to 2000. I think we have, if I'm not mistaken, I believe we have some ads from 2006, 2008, and I believe we're going to end with an ad from the primary season earlier this year in Alabama. All of these ads, to varying degrees, strike many of the same tones, particularly focusing on judges who are running for office by attacking them as being soft on crime, coddling criminals, and that sort of thing. Often these are run by groups that have nothing to do with the criminal justice system, but that in fact find this a theme that is effective in driving voters' choices. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and show you a few of these ads.
He was adorable. Stevie had just turned 3 years old before he was beaten and tortured to death. The Anders decision let my son's killer walk free after serving less than a third of his murder sentence. You could have a convicted murderer released on the Anders decision next door, and you wouldn't even know it. If Justice Alexander hadn't voted for this decision, this wouldn't have happened. Judge Alexander is way out of touch with this issue. I'm here supporting John Groen because John Groen is for victims and their families.
Judge Deborah Bell Passeur is the only candidate with 27 years of experience.
I'm not old, just experienced.
A former officer, Deborah Bell Passeur is the only candidate who has sent criminals to jail.
I have seen and heard it all.
She's the only candidate not backed by the oil companies.
Not one dime.
And Deborah is the only mother and foster mother.
That's the most important job of all.
Judge Deborah Bell Passeur, amazing strength and the grace to serve.
Unbelievable. Shadowy special interests supporting Louis Butler are attacking Judge Michael Gableman. It's not true. Judge, District Attorney Michael Gableman has committed his life to locking up criminals to keep families safe, putting child molesters behind bars for over 100 years. Louis Butler worked to put criminals on the street, like Reuben Lee Mitchell, who raped an 11-year-old girl with learning disabilities. Butler found a loophole. Mitchell went on to molest another child. Can Wisconsin families feel safe with Louis Butler on the Supreme Court?
One story's a fairy tale, the other's a nightmare. The fairy tale, Sleeping Beauty. The nightmare, the sleeping judge, Cliff Taylor.
Judge Taylor fell asleep several times in the middle of our argument. How could he judge based on the facts when he was asleep?
Taylor was voted the worst judge on the state Supreme Court, and fellow judges called for an investigation of Taylor for misconduct and abuse of power. The sleeping judge, Cliff Taylor, he needs a wake-up call.
On the French Riviera, where the rich and famous play, Spike and Don spent a very pleasant day. While together, the time they were spending, a matter of millions in court was pending. Now when Massey first won their appeal, it was Spike's vote that sealed the deal. Justice is blind, but you can see Spike showed bad judgment in hearing this plea. Spike has recused, but what will it take for the justice himself to admit his mistake? You decide how this story ends. Is justice for all, or just between friends?
What do I believe? I believe in God, and the right to say that in public. I believe the Second Amendment is written in ink, not pencil, and no West Virginia court should dare tread on those rights. I believe our judges should spend more time protecting our families and our values, and less time worrying about the comfort of criminals. And as a proud West Virginian, I believe our Supreme Court has a desperate need for a good conservative. I'm Beth Walker. If you agree, I need your vote.
Mike Bolin took money linked to BP Oil, the same oil company that's destroying our Gulf Coast. Why does it matter? Because after Bolin took money linked to Exxon, he allowed the oil giant to cheat Alabama taxpayers. Liberal Bolin is just as soft on criminals. Last month, he reversed the murder conviction of a robber who killed a handicapped man. That's liberal Judge Bolin. He sides with oil companies and he's soft on crime.